Hello again. A militant attack on a major base for international forces in southern Afghanistan has killed 2 American Marines. Several more Americans were wounded in the assault on the Camp Bastion compound in Helmand province. The attackers breached the perimeter fence using guns, mortars and rocket-propelled grenades. A US spokesman at Camp Bastion has said an estimated 16 Taliban fighters were killed. Mike Breen is the vice president of the Truman National Security Project. He's also a former US Army officer who has served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Speaking from Washington, D.C., I asked him what he made of the attack.
This type of attack is not intended to accomplish a military objective. And by that I mean Camp Bastion is a major installation. I think the Taliban who conducted this attack knew going into the enterprise that they had absolutely no hope of overrunning Camp Bastion or even significantly disrupting the operations of Camp Bastion. They did this, as insurgents so often do and terrorists so often do, in order to achieve a headline. They did this to get some attention to themselves, their cause, their conflict, and to use it as a rallying cry. We've seen these type of attacks before against Bagram Airfield and other major installations in Afghanistan over the course of this decade-long war, and that's what this attack, I think, is very, very likely to be about.
The security there must be intense. Are you surprised that an event like this could even take place?
Well, the security is certainly formidable. It's a military objective. I think it even goes beyond saying it's security. This is an incredibly difficult to take military objective defended by very many troops, incredibly well armed and well trained. That said, it's a fixed installation. Camp Bastion doesn't move. It's there all the time. It's been there for many years at this point. And the Taliban have the capability to choose the time and place of their attacks. And so it's not surprising that they were able to pull off a hit and run, do a little bit of damage and withdraw. It would be very surprising if they were able to do more than that, but of course they were not.
Who is supporting the Taliban? Who is giving them their weapons? Because after more than a decade of the war against the Taliban, the insurgents continue to be well armed. And that's got to surprise some people, thinking that eventually these guys are going to run out of weapons. They just won't have enough heavy weaponry to attack the NATO forces.
I'm glad you asked that question. It certainly surprised me. When I was serving in Afghanistan back in 2005 and 2006 in a different part of the country, I'm looking at the hard scrabble hills and one of the world's most depressed economies going, who's paying for all these bullets? It turns out that the Taliban's funding is derived in part from a lot of private donations, many of them from the Gulf, and also in part from opium sales. The Taliban's very fractious. There are many subgroups, and they're funded through a series of criminal activities. But a lot of this, and it relates to the attack on Camp Bastion, a lot of their funding comes from private donations coming from the Gulf states. And so one of the benefits for a Taliban commander in staging a spectacular attack like this on Camp Bastion that makes the news is that they're able to go to their funders and say, look at me, I'm fighting the true fight, give me more money.
Mike Breen in Washington. The United States is sending an elite Marine unit to Sudan after attacks on its embassy there, part of wider protests, many of them violent, against America and its allies in almost 20 Muslim countries. At least 7 people were killed in clashes in Khartoum, Tunis and Cairo. The wave of protests was triggered by an obscure amateur video shot in the United States and seen in the Muslim world as anti-Islamic. Our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen sent this report from the Egyptian capital.
On the banks of the Nile, more tear gas and more stones. Protests that started here in Cairo on Tuesday night are still going on and have spread across the Arab Middle East and beyond. The police fired repeated volleys of tear gas to keep them away from the US embassy, the target here and in other countries, because the anti-Muslim film they hate so much was produced in America. The anger about the film is still a driving force. Here in Cairo, other grievances, including hatred of the police, have been grafted onto it.
This is about a lot more now than the film and dislike of America. It's got tied up with the fractures in Egyptian society. Since the revolution, this has been an unhappy place, and those splits are getting wider.
In Khartoum, Sudan's capital, protesters broke into the German embassy. America's Western allies are being blamed too. In every Muslim country, the violence, as well as the film, appalls plenty of people. But what's happening is also tapping into assumptions that the West is against them. Later, they attacked the British embassy and moved on to the US compound. And the storm caused by the film ended another life. In Tunis, at least 2 demonstrators were killed as the US embassy was stormed. Later, the American school was burnt down. Across the region, local factors are also feeding the anger. In Tunisia, this could be exploited by hardliners known as Salafists, who are agitating against more moderate political Islamists who won the election after the revolution. In Tripoli in northern Lebanon, American-style fast food outlets were targeted. The city is a stronghold of Sunni political Islamists. And the protests have spread beyond the Arab countries. This was Bangladesh. One film on the internet is deepening anti-Western feeling across a broad swathe of the world. In the United States, the Americans brought home the bodies of their dead ambassador to Libya and 3 colleagues who were killed when their consulate in Benghazi was attacked. The crisis shows the limits of American and Western influence in a part of the world where they once had real political power. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Cairo.
We're going to get more now on our top story, the attack on Camp Bastion in Afghanistan. Our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale, is in the Afghan capital, Kabul. He joins me now. Jonathan, about an hour ago or so, we heard that apparently about 16 Taliban militants have been killed. I can see it's morning now, so are more details emerging of this attack?
Yes, we're now told that this extraordinary assault on Camp Bastion, which is a very secure military base, the largest military base in Helmand, one of the biggest in Afghanistan, that there were insurgents who managed to breach the security. Now we're told by NATO that there are about between 7 and 10 insurgents who managed to get onto the base. We are told they have damaged a number of aircraft and buildings. We've also been told that 2 NATO troops have been killed. We think that none of those are British, but clearly a brazen assault. Now the Taliban are saying about 10 insurgents got onto the base, that this was motivated by a revenge against US and British troops because of that film. But clearly the concerns that Prince Harry was also on that base. We are told by NATO he was never in any danger. That said, we've also been told by NATO that some of those aircraft have been damaged. We understand it's on the US side of Camp Bastion, where the US military kit is. And we're also told that although this attack started at 10 o'clock last night, that the clearance operation is still ongoing. Indeed, the Taliban say that fighting is still taking place. So what's happening at the moment is all flights have been suspended in and out of Bastion while they try to make sure that that base is secure. This is an extraordinary attack on what should be a very, very secure base.
Yes, tell us more about the security at Camp Bastion, Jonathan, because it's surprising that it should be the target for an attack like this.
Yeah, it's a massive, sprawling military base, not just Camp Bastion. Next door is Camp Leatherneck, where the US Marines are. It is a base in the desert, essentially, so in theory they can see all around them what's coming in. There are sophisticated sensors to try to ensure that there are no intruders inside that base. Security obviously tight inside that base too, but I think it's extraordinary that these insurgents were able to breach that security and make their way onto the base and clearly conduct a firefight using small arms, rocket-propelled grenades, we're told, when they were on there. And clearly there was a fight back from NATO troops as they came in. And as I said, we're not clear at the moment as to whether the fighting is continuing. NATO is saying the clearance operation is ongoing. But it is very extraordinary to have this kind of assault on such a large military base where security is, in theory, so tight.
You mentioned Prince Harry, and the Taliban has said that it will try to kill him. Does his presence in Camp Bastion make it a more dangerous place to be?
Well, you know, before Prince Harry arrived, and as he arrived, the Ministry of Defence was saying that they thought the threat to Prince Harry was low. Remember, he's not in such a high-profile position in the sense that he's not going out on patrol He's not on the ground out of the confines of a base, a military base, as he was last time when he was here in 2008. So in theory, this should be a very safe place indeed. But as we've seen, you know, this attack will raise questions about that security. Now, I think it's important to see what the Taliban are saying about the motivation for this attack. It seems to be, at the moment, the Taliban are saying the motivation was not to try to target Prince Harry. The motivation was to take revenge for this video, for this film that's caused outrage in other parts of the Arab world. So I think that that's clearly what the Taliban are saying. I think there will be questions raised about the security for Prince Harry.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. That's Jonathan Beale, our defence correspondent in the Afghan capital, Kabul.